Good morning. My name is Lynn Cleek, and I will be leading today's service. David Ellison will be presenting our message this morning. Our opening words this morning are by Margaret Mead. Nunca dudes que un pequeño grupo de ciudadanos reflexivos y comprometidos puede cambiar el mundo. De hecho, es lo único que ha existido jamás. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that can. And so I just want to welcome you with, live from Fellowship Hall, it's our LCUUF Sunday service. Our announcements were on a slideshow before the service. If you didn't see them, don't worry. They were sent out by email yesterday with the order of service for today. A few notes. Our building is open to all for in-person services. However, we do continue to offer our service on Zoom each Sunday for those who are unable to attend in person. Wearing masks in the fellowship building is required at this time. And now, a special welcome to our visitors. If you are visiting with us for the first time, have returned or reconnected with us after a long absence, we invite you to say your name and tell us where you are from. If you are on Zoom, one moment. If you are on Zoom, turn your video on, wave your hand, and we'll ask you to unmute. If you are in the room, just raise your hand. So, Gary will pass the mic.
We know you.
Hi, I'm David, and I'm from Berkeley, California, and I've been living here lakeside full-time, 2 years.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Ron from Phoenix, Arizona. Been living here for 2 years.
Welcome.
My name is Steve Hamby. I'm from Atlanta. I've been here for 19 days. And
Whoa.
long-term Unitarian.
Anyone else? How about Zoom? Is there anyone new to us on Zoom? I guess not. Just a brief note. We offer a wide variety of services on various topics presented by our members, outside guests, as well as our minister, Reverend Matt Alspa. We hope you will return to sample this variety of thought and belief. Our chalice lighting words today are from a global chalice lighting from the LCUUF. We have gathered here to light the chalice with the flame that symbolizes freedom of expression, faith, and other individual liberties. Flame that brings light, helps us to see and fends off the darkness. Flame that warms up when it is cold, either outside or in our hearts. Let us now light our chalice with these words that we sing together.
We kindle this light in celebration for the life that we share.
Our opening hymn is De Colores. Please rise as you are willing and able and join in singing.
All the colors, yes, the colors we see in this springtime with all of its flowers. All the colors, when the sunlight shines out through a rift in the skies that
Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have a joy or sorrow to share today, you can type it into the chat now and we'll read those aloud. First, let us recall the joys. Whatever you may be celebrating, whatever evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or for others. Zoom are welcome to type joys in the chat box, but we'll start with the folks here. Are there any joys in the room that people would like to share?
We have a new grandbaby. Kason was born a couple weeks ago. He came 4 weeks early, and it was kind of hairy for a little bit, but he is home from the NICU and doing really well.
After 3 weeks with no car, I finally have my car back, and it hasn't run this well in 10 years.
How about any joys to be shared from Zoom?
Yes, from Colleen Berry. Please light a candle of gratitude for the incredible blessing of being in Hawaii with 2 dear friends.
That it,
And that's
Richard?
it.
Okay. Now let us voice our sorrows or concerns, whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. You're welcome to type sorrows and concerns in the chat box. But again, we'll start with the folks here. And please say your name before speaking.
My name is Sue Kelly. As you know, my sister-in-law was at MD Anderson last week in Houston. The tumor on her pancreas is stable. However, they found a huge mass on her liver, and they're going to have to do a biopsy.
Are there any sorrows to be shared on Zoom?
No, we just have a virtual room full of happy people.
That's awesome, the best kind. And then one last candle. This candle is from our care team, represents those sorrows that are too raw or too difficult for us to share out loud. So many of us have had losses, partners, children, grandchildren, pets, losses that remain with us every day. So many of us have burdens, anger, fear, frustration, all of those things that weigh heavily on our hearts. We light this candle for all those unspoken sorrows. And now we will just share a moment of silence to hold in our hearts both the sorrows and the joys that have been shared this morning. And now we will have our speaker, David Ellison.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. And it's just fun to talk about history, especially Mexican history. We just celebrated 2 days ago, the 16 de septiembre, which is their July 4th, where they celebrate their independence. And we're going to look at that war for independence and specifically at 3 priests who were leaders in that war. Now, I was raised a Catholic, and when I learned that there were Catholic priests that were leading a revolution, this astounded me. And I thought, what the heck are priests doing leading a revolution? And I realized that they were embodying an approach or a theology that would not be named for maybe 100 years, and that was called liberation theology. And so we'll look at that. And for me, it's a very problematic belief, because once you accept the idea that maybe we are called as people of faith to fight against oppression and injustice, then how far are you willing to go? And that is a difficult question indeed. So let's look at this war for independence, which is not to be confused with the Mexican Revolution. That was the catastrophic war against Porfirio Diaz. This is the war that began the country of Mexico, which at the time was known as New Spain. Now, next slide, please, or the first slide where it goes Mexico pre-independence. And this is where I'll establish that there was eminent need for changes. There was tremendous injustice. And first of all, New Spain was essentially a feudal society. It had a very, very rigid caste structure. And I forgot to turn on my clock. There we go. 4 rigid classes. At the top were the Peninsulares. They were from the Iberian Peninsula of Spain. They were sent over by the King of Spain to rule the colony. And beneath them were the Criollos. These were Spaniards, but they had been born here in Mexico. But because they weren't from Spain, they were never allowed to take any positions of real power. You can already anticipate that's going to create tremendous resentment on the part of the Criollos. They're going to say, now, wait a minute, I was born here, and you people come over and are telling me what to do. Now, beneath them were the mestizos. These are mixed Spanish and native blood, which at the time was not the majority, but today almost all Mexicans are mestizos. And then at the bottom were the natives, and they were essentially slaves. As a matter of fact, Leslie Bird Simpson, a preeminent Mexican historian, and I'll just read his quote. He just said, every part of New Spain's economic structure depended on the labor of Indians. The conquest of Mexico was, in a real sense, the capture of native labor. As a matter of fact, Columbus established what was known as the encomienda system, whereby the Spaniards would come over and they'd be given these huge tracts of land, and they owned everything on the land, including and especially the natives. The natives were not free to leave. Their job was to create wealth for the Spaniards. Now, that's a pretty awful system, just rife with injustice and oppression. Next slide, please. So what was going on in the world that sort of acted as a catalyst for this? First of all, Napoleon had invaded Spain, and the King of Spain had to flee and was living in exile. Meanwhile, local Spanish governments called juntas had risen and were fighting the French. And then Napoleon had installed a French puppet, which begs a question then, who's in charge of New Spain? Is it the king in exile? Is it the juntas? Is it the French puppet? And this question and this tremendous insecurity, back in New Spain here in what would become Mexico, that's a dangerous position to be in with this tremendous injustice. And it's not really clear who's in charge. Now, the king had appointed a viceroy who was ruling here in Spain. The trouble was, for the conservatives, this viceroy was liberal. And the conservatives feared, oh God, he's going to take advantage of this volatile situation and declare independence. And so the conservatives overthrew the viceroy in order to prevent a war for independence. Now, the irony is, of course, that's what caused all the liberals to say, well, that's jacked. We aren't going to put up with this. And that started all the conspiracies that, in fact, led to the revolution against Spain. The question is, all right, if we're going to have this war, what are we fighting about? Very different than in the United States, where our Declaration and especially our Constitution made it very, very clear we were done with monarchies and we were going to establish a republic. None of that was clear here. And so the question is, all right, if there's going to be a war, what's it about? Are we just trying to restore this viceroy, or are we trying to actually declare our independence from Spain? And if we are going to declare our independence, are we just going to, elect as a Mexican king, or are we going to establish a republic here? And if we are going to establish a republic, are we going to address the injustices of this caste system and the encomienda system? And the answer is all of the above, depending on whom you asked and when you asked it. the revolutionaries never really agreed on what they were fighting for, except the Catholic priests. They were all the radicals. They wanted independence, they wanted a republic, and they wanted justice for all. So just be aware that these priests are leading the radical charge. The only thing that the revolutionaries really could agree on is that Mexico would remain a Catholic country, a purely Catholic country, and that would create all sorts of havoc in the centuries afterwards. Okay, next slide, please. This idea that a priest could lead a war for independence later would become known as liberation theology, and this became huge during the wars in Central America in the 60s as the Jesuit priests fought for the justice of the oppressed, especially in El Salvador and Guatemala, that were under the thumb of US-installed ruthless regimes. But let's go back to the Mexican War for Independence, and we'll look at the first and most famous priest, Father Miguel Hidalgo. And let me tell you, next slide, please. This guy was interesting. First of all, he was incredibly bright, a real theologian, but he had fun. He gambled, he drank, he danced, he fathered 8 children with 4 different women. That didn't get him into trouble. He did run afoul of the Inquisition. He challenged the divine right of kings, papal infallibility, and the virgin birth. But somehow he had friends in high places. He survived that too. But what really got him into trouble is when he went to the peninsular bishops and said, listen, doesn't the Bible, the Word of God, teach us that we should be catering primarily to the poor and the oppressed instead of to the wealthy who put their money in the plates on Sunday? Shouldn't we be reaching out to the poor and especially the natives? And that got him banished to the town of Dolores, where they said, fine, go play with your natives in the town of Dolores. We'll never see you again. Little did they know. And he joined the Querétaro conspiracy to fight to overthrow this unjust system. And he was working with other people such as Allende, and Allende was a military officer. He was going to be one of the leaders of this revolution, but they were just in the formative stages when their conspiracy was betrayed. And the jig was up, and so they had to declare independence, or at least the beginning of this war, long before they were ready. And so on the 16th of September, 1810, Miguel Hidalgo's famous Grito de Dolores, which means, the cry from the town of Dolores, but could also be translated, Dolores means pain and anguish in Spain, the cry of pain. And he said, once again, this is what they hadn't planned. And so what are they fighting for? And what he actually said is, open to debate. One of the versions is, long live religion. Long live our most holy mother of Guadalupe. And by the way, the Lady of Guadalupe became their banner, their rallying cry for this war. Long live the King of Spain, and death or down with bad government. And how far did that go? Did he actually say death to the Peninsulares? Not clear. But the natives that he worked with, they grabbed their machetes, they grabbed their pitchforks, and they went from town to town, and they just butchered people everywhere they went. Those natives grabbed their pitchforks and machetes. It was not pretty. And in fact, the Allende, who was the guy who was supposed to be leading this, was aghast. He said, what we need is an army, not a mob. But they ended up with a mob of nearly 90,000. And Father Miguel was convinced by sheer numbers, we will win. Very long story. He was wrong. And eventually the mob was defeated and dispersed. He was captured, put on trial, convicted, defrocked, excommunicated, and executed. And they thought that was the end of this war. But no, moving on to the next priest, Father Jose Maria Morelos. Next slide. Yes, there you've got him. He was the real McCoy. He understood a lot of things that Father Miguel didn't, and he developed an army of 6,000 crack troops that initially just scored victory after victory after victory against the Spaniards. But then he realized we've got to take care of the political side as well. He formally declared independence, and he developed a constitution that called for a republic. and the end of the encomienda system, the caste system. And in fact, in words that sort of previewed Martin Luther King, he said, the only distinction between one American and another will be that between vice and virtue. And they wanted to declare him generalissimo, and he said, no, just call me servant of the nation. You got to love this guy. But that delay and taking care of the political side allowed the Spaniards to regroup. They counterattacked. Eventually, he too was defeated. He was put on trial, convicted, excommunicated, and executed. And they thought, good, now the war is over. But no, it wasn't. And then locally, our own dear Father Marcos Castellanos, here lakeside, he convinced a very large number of natives to fortify Mescala Island, just to the east of us. And it's a wonderful field trip if you can ever get out to that island. The ruins of that are still there, and the fort structure there. And they built 5 concentric defensive walls, 2 of them submerged to prevent the Spaniards from they essentially made the island impregnable. And you think, God, where did these priests get it? I mean, they studied theology, not military tactics. Just incredibly bright and people. And for 4 years, they created havoc here lakeside for the Spaniards. The Spaniards had to divert thousands of troops here. They never could defeat them. And in the end, they just burned all the crops lakeside and starved them out. And in what was very interesting, when finally the natives on the island, starving and sick, finally did surrender. Normally, during this war, there was no quarter. They accepted no prisoners. In this case, they let them all go. I think it was a sign of grudging respect. And Father Castellanos went on to become the rector, the parish priest for Ajijic. And unfortunately, he died in obscurity and in abject poverty. But the point is, this war was largely led by priests. My goodness, where did that come? But we'll get there in a minute. How did it all end? This fella, Agustin Iturbide, was fighting against these insurgents. He hated them, especially after all the atrocities. But then when back in Spain, they enacted this liberal constitution, he said, well, we don't want to live beneath that. Suddenly, even he decided that maybe independence wouldn't be so bad. So he said, okay, let's just stop fighting. And then they decided he would become their first king, the Emperor Augustine I. And so that's how Mexico began, as an empire and with an emperor in charge. But the liberals said, oh, heck no, that's not why we had this war. They overthrew him and then enacted a republic, and their first president, Guadalupe Victoria, there's going to be a wonderful quote about him at the end of this service. Unfortunately, he was the only president in the next 30 years to actually fulfill his term, because the liberals and conservatives never could agree, and they just had perpetual civil war, which largely explains why Mexico is still in many ways a second world nation. They just, for most of their history, have been politically unstable. As late as the 1860s, the conservatives invited Maximilian in to become their new emperor, and they had another civil war. All right, but let's get back to liberation theology. Next slide. The question is, were Fathers Hidalgo, Morelos, and Castellanos right? Does the Christian gospel call for the faithful, including priests, to work for justice and against oppression? And I would add as a corollary, can you be a true person of faith, love your neighbor as yourself, and not be involved in that work? I suspect that most of us would agree that, yeah, we need to be fighting for justice. But as I used to tell my students, beware, once you set foot on that road, you're going to have to start making some tough decisions. How far are you willing to go? Does it just mean that you'll vote? Does it mean that you're going to get involved politically? Will you engage in acts of civil disobedience? Or like these priests and the Jesuits in Latin America, will you foment revolution? Oh God, for me, and this this has been a very, very tough thing for me throughout my life, and I don't really have a good answer. And you can go to the final slide, but let me just discuss some of the difficulties I find. I'm a pacifist. I am horrified by war, and for many reasons. I think most of the wars that even the United States has fought have been fought under false pretexts, and then I just am very aware that if I personally had gone to war, I would not return the same human being. It would forever scar me psychologically, and I'm just horrified by war. And I think of, but that's not an easy call. Let's look at two very famous people. Washington said, if you want peace, prepare for war. I mean, it's nice to have ideals, but we live in a real world with a lot of nasty people out there. And so, it's all right, be a pacifist, and that may be the end of everything you love. But Einstein said you cannot simultaneously prevent and prepare for war. But John F. Kennedy said those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. So I don't know. I think for a while I was involved in the refugee movement and getting refugees from El Salvador and Guatemala north to Canada where they would be safe. And I met some Salvadoran teachers, and they faced a very difficult choice, because if you were a real teacher in El Salvador, you would be tortured, then murdered, and your body would be left along the side of the road so your colleagues and your students would see what had happened to you. So if you wanted to be a real teacher, you either had to flee, as the teachers I met and helped get to Canada, or you had to head to the hills and grab a rifle and fight for your students. And I've been a teacher all my life. I think I was a pretty courageous one, but have I ever had to put my life on the line? Never. And I wonder, is my pacifism the privilege of someone who has never really known oppression? I don't know. And I think of a very famous quote by Gandhi that I've always found to be very troubling. They asked him after he had won independence for India during World War II, and the interviewer said, well, Mr. Gandhi, would you use nonviolence against Hitler? And his answer was, yes, I would. And then he added, and I would lose. Fascism is frightening stuff. And I wonder, is it right to declare yourself a pacifist in the face of fascism and to let someone like Hitler or the Japanese run amok? I don't know. But then I think of Nietzsche's famous line, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. And remember that when we defeated Hitler and the Japanese, we bombed the heck out of Dresden, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. We became monsters. So here's the trouble. If you believe in liberation theology, but you understand the danger of fascism, and there are very dangerous movements in the United States towards fascism, how far are we willing to go? If we believe in liberation theology that we must, as people of faith, fight injustice, how far? And is it incredibly naive and perhaps even irresponsible to be a pacifist in the face of fascism? I tell you, I don't know. And I'll end with one other thing. If someone blows up an abortion clinic, wouldn't they argue that that was liberation theology? You can see that once you open the Pandora's box of liberation theology, it becomes very messy indeed. And I don't have any answers for you today, but I think we could have a pretty interesting discussion. And with that, I'll end, and we're going to have a discussion here, very brief, about 10 minutes, and the floor is open for your comments or thoughts or insults. And the one thing we ask is that please keep your comments short, 30 seconds or so that other people can have a chance to talk. And I'm told that people can, I believe, either speak or type in their comments on Zoom. And so we can have a general discussion on liberation theology and what it means for us today. Because if things continue to go bad in the world, we all may have to face the same decisions that these priests faced in pre-revolution, pre-war for independence Mexico. Any comments or questions?
I'll try to keep this really brief. Your talk had a lot of moving parts, and I was very pleased with you and me that I was able to follow them. I was able to follow all the moving parts. That was great. So it's the talk was clear, and that was sort of even less or more important than you kept saying, "I don't know," which that's a good thing. And because it relates to pacifism and violence, because one time somebody asked Bertrand Russell, "Would you die for your beliefs?" He said, "No." Well, why not? I might be wrong. I think that part of it, I might be wrong, gets underplayed compared to what do you stand for? What are you going to do? That kind of thing. So I wanted to mention that to you. Thank you.
Over here.
As usual, you sure provoke a lot of thinking. Thank you very much, David. I'd never heard the history, and I've been here 22 years, so that's a shame on me. So thank you.
I will, while we're waiting for someone else, maybe I can provoke another thought, but most of the wars we've fought, I don't agree with. World War II is a hard one for me in the face of what Hitler and the Japanese were doing. And I just think, oh, sorry, Jews, 6 million of you, but I'd like to help, but I'm a pacifist. Or the rape of Nanking, oh, ouch, sorry, would like to help. I don't know. I don't know. I'm glad I never had to face that choice.
Here's a comment from Zoom from Tom McClure.
I'm just
Says,
curious, how many Jews-
excellent. Thank you for the overview of Mexican liberation theology, action, and results.
You're very welcome. I've got a book coming out eventually. It's going to be called Mexican Streets, Tales of Tragedy and Triumph. It'll be a history of Mexico, written by an expat.
Good. Now, Dee Dee says, I certainly would have helped. We know that about you, Dee Dee.
Can you be a pacifist and support, say, World War II through monetary or other ways without actually fighting?
I don't want to be the guru and give my answer. Can someone else answer that? Can you support the war monetarily, but not fight yourself, and then say, I'm being true to my pacifism, but I'm helping those that are willing to fight?
I've been thinking about this on a more than daily basis with Ukraine. And as a US taxpayer, that's what you're doing. You are supporting war. We all do. Most of our money goes to the military and the huge machine.
I have another question. What would have happened if the Allies had never gone into Europe? Where would we be now?
Yeah, someone pointed out there, I think it's called The Man in the Tower or something to that effect. It's the Man in the High Tower. It's about what would have happened if Hitler had won World War II. And without question, if we had not entered World War II, things would have been very different, I suspect. But that's hypothetical. And Hitler was striving with everything he could to develop the atomic weapons that we did. Can you imagine?
My husband was a soldier in World War II, but he also was a pacifist and suffered all his life from having been a soldier. He couldn't shoot anything when he got back. He could not go hunting. He couldn't kill a rabbit. It's a difficult thing that we ask of these young men that we send off.
I couldn't agree more.
I think Unitarians by nature are a questioning people, and we question ourselves a lot. And I think of myself as pacifistic, but in the case of Ukraine, I've been sending money because to me, it's a crystal clear thing that evil is happening. And I am the wishiest, washiest person I know, but who knows?
I mean, as I met these teachers, and I had 36 years in the classroom, and to say that I'm passionate about education would be an understatement. And if they were murdering my colleagues, torturing and then murdering them, and saying that we are going to brainwash your students so that they accept this injustice, would I still be a pacifist?
Here I have one more comment from Brad Wisniewski. He says, thank you so much for the thought-provoking comments and summarizing the history. I think of issues where I have changed my mind, and in this moment am haunted by this statement, but what if I'm wrong?
Okay, well, let's hope we never have to face that choice. I would say, please vote.
Yes.
Maybe we can stop things before they get really bad. An ounce of prevention. So if we get out and vote, and maybe we can prevent the swing towards fascism and never have to face really, really difficult choices. Thank you all. It's been a lot of fun.
This is the time in our service when we ask that you remember we share our gifts here through pledging and donations. Instructions for payments to the fellowship are on a slide during the announcements before the service every week. For the people here at the fellowship, we will pass a basket. And while you are considering your gifts, Gary, you may start. Thank you. And while you are considering your gifts to the fellowship, remember that each month LCUUF donates 5,000 pesos or more to an organization in our Lakeside community. We share 1/2 of the offerings collected at the fellowship each week with an organization. For the month of September, we've been supporting Tepewa Centro Comunitario. If you are not attending the fellowship in person, please donate to Share the Basket when you pay your pledge. Donate to Share the Basket separately or indicate what part of your donation is actually for Share the Basket. The offering has now been given and received. If you are not attending the fellowship in person, please donate to Share the Basket when you pay your pledge. Donate to Share the Basket separately. I think I've read this. Sorry. We'll just move right on to closing words. How's that? Our closing words are by Guadalupe Victoria, whom David was talking about earlier. Cuando el pueblo salta sus barreras, casi ningún esfuerzo es bastante poderoso para detenerlos. When the people jump their barriers, almost no effort is sufficiently powerful to stop it. Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla declared, "Viva la independencia, viva la América, muera el mal gobierno. Viva independence, viva America, death to bad government." We will now extinguish our chalices with these words, which we will read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts and share with all the world. If you would like further discussion, I'm sure David would be happy to do that. And that concludes our service for today. Thank you all for coming, and there's coffee in the outside area. We'll first have the postlude, Sobre las olas.